Hey everyone, you remember how amazing Flux was when it first came out, but we were all so frustrated with how terrible the skin looked? Well, we have a few new tricks to show you on how to get amazing skin very, very easily out of some of the newest models for Flux. Also, we're going to be running through the newest version of PulID, also tips and tricks on how to get it running, as well as Redux, and also going through a new technique to add some blur to really let your images stand out. As always, thank you so much for liking, sharing, and subscribing with others. I really appreciate all that great feedback on all of your comments. Feel free to share your thoughts. I'm always looking to hear what you guys have to say. And also feel free to jump on the Discord. I love chatting with everyone and also sharing our art and cool new techniques. All right, you excited? Let's get into it. All right, so we got lots to go through. Pretty exciting stuff. So first things first, you're going to see that the loader's changed quite a bit. Always looking to make improvements and make it more efficient. Again, our goal here is to use this maybe 85% of the time in the single window here for most of my gens, to basically to go off and to build wherever you want as well. And so I'm going to start off with the prompt here. Great. And you can see it's a really great shot. Composition's pretty good as well. Right away, you'll see that the skin quality is really excellent. And the reason for that is this model, which is the top Flux leaderboard model right now. It's Project 0 version 3. We're going to actually make it even better. And so I have a new option here called the Skin Texture Booster, which I'm going to run. And while that's running, I'm going to jump into it to show you what it's actually doing. So it's basically taking the original image that was just rendered a second ago, and it's going to do a couple of things. First, it's going to use the upscale model. This is from the upscale database, and it's a skin improvement upscaler. Then you can see it's only ×1. So it's not increasing the resolution at all. It's just literally going over, looking at where the skin texture is and improving it. Additionally, I'm using this really cool node from Jags, which is essentially loading, different YOLO models, right? And so this one's again focused on skin. It's bringing it into kind of a noise increaser. And this noise increaser, with the addition of some grain, is going to basically simulate normal skin, right? Photorealistic skin. So basically it just composites that kind of graininess and a little bit of that noise, and it brings it all into a single image, and then it beams it back. And so when you beam back, it looks even more realistic. So it's a very, very excellent combo to be able to increase the skin quality. Now, you'll see down here, I have an additional booster, which you can just simply unblock. I didn't include it here because it does actually add a few extra seconds of render time, which you may not want to do. But what it basically does is, before we go into the routine we just talked about, we're essentially doing instead of face detailer, same sort of skin finder, right, to do some additional rendering. And so we basically are using the same prompt that we just were talking about a second ago, and then rendering very low against the image to just change the skin. Okay. So you can see, obviously, very, very strong result here. And so that's skin improvement. Now, additionally, you'll see this purple box and you're like, well, why? It just says exactly the same prompt that I had typed in here. Well, now I've actually included a prompt enhancer. And so if I go into my LLM prompt enhancer, just to show you what it looks like, all it is basically bringing Ollama using whichever models I want, right? Like we've done in previous videos. I have, some pretty good guidance here around the types of things you want to include, and it then brings back the result to then render. So you basically, when I have it turned on, if I render it, you can see that the prompt now changes. This is my prompt that I've typed in, but you can see now this very nice, elaborate, but focused prompt about the scene. And what you'll see right away is the results are stunning, really, really stunning. So definitely recommend checking this out for the future. You don't have to use Ollama, and you don't have to use an LLM either. Of course, it does add some cycle time and a little bit of the memory requirement side, But I do have to say that if you're doing simple prompts and you want some help, this is a fantastic way to get some additional benefit out of that. All right. So on to topic 2, we're going to talk about PulID. Now, PulID, before we actually do it and make it work, has had challenges in the past. For the benefit of the community, I decided to crash my installation of Comfy yesterday so that I could experience all the fun again of the types of things that we run into all the time when trying to get PulID to work. And so there were 3 basically top issues that I came across, and we're going to quickly talk to them to help resolve them for you if you come across these issues. So issue 1 is revolving around issues with the Ultralytics or impact subpack not updating. So with the update of Comfy recently, you may not be able to update subpack, and it'll just be very bothersome on why it won't install. And a lot of it has to do either with not having the most up-to-date version of Comfy, so make sure you update to the latest version and use our force update technique that we've done in previous videos. And additionally, you'll want to upgrade the Ultralytics, right? Because there was a security issue with it previously, which has now been resolved. So in the pip area, and when I mean pip area, in your Comfy manager, you have a install pip packages, right? So when you click that, you're going to type in there, basically just -u Ultralytics. Then you're going to restart Comfy, and then it's going to force an update for Ultralytics to make sure it's on the most up-to-date version. Issue 2. So there were issues with Insight not being installed. So of course, if you have Reactor or other sorts of arc face or face-related nodes, you will need Insight. You may have challenges getting it installed. And it is also a big pain in the butt. But if you go to this link, which I'll also have in the description, it actually walks you through literally step by step of what you need to do to get this thing to work. And so you'll want to obviously download the right file here, depending on your Python version, and just follow this step by step, and you will be good to go. And that should resolve the Insight face issue pretty quickly. So issue 3. So sometimes you'll get Insight to install, and you'll have your nodes there, but your models for Insight won't work, or it'll give you an error just saying Insight face. And that is because the Insight face models are in the wrong folder. So if you go to your models Insight face folder, right, you probably already have your InSwapper. If you have Reactor, you'll have a subfolder in there called models. And so if you go in there, you may have a zip file for Antelope v2. And so you'll have a directory here that should automatically install when you do it called Antelope v2. It's basically just it unzipped it. Now, what you may see is these files either A, are only 1 kilobyte each, which is of course just a placeholder, not the real file, or you may actually see an additional Antelope v2 subfolder with these files in it. So it's kind of like if you see here models, Antelope v2, an additional Antelope v2, and then those files. And that's the problem. For whatever reason, the installation of these files gets into an additional subdirectory called Antelope v2. So it's models, Antelope v2, and then the files. You need to take it out of that additional Antelope v2 and bring it back 1 level to just here. So all of your files should be located under just Insight face, models, Antelope v2, and that's it. Once you do that, restart Comfy, you should be good to go. Okay, so let's get into PulID. So PulID is really awesome, and it's essentially a face kind of swapper builder of sorts, but it works a little differently than some of the other packages like Reactor and others where it's just simply post-processing, adding the face. So I'm going to add an example here using my handy templates. And so you can see a couple of things, and we're going to talk through each item. So first, we're going to load our image. Okay, great. It's going to do a couple of things. So first, it's basically going to upscale it. So many times, if you have a low-res version of your face, you'll want to upscale it. You don't have to, right? In fact, if you have a high-res version, you could actually disable this, no prob. And the apply PulID, which is, by the way, part of PulID Flux 2. So make sure you're installing Flux 2, this new version of the node. and you can get rid of the old one. And so it's expecting a few different things. It's using, the load insight. And basically, you're just dragging, right? You're dragging off of each of these nodes to basically get these connector nodes in place. You're just pulling the clip, the insight face. I would recommend just using CUDA. And the PulID model, also note that this is 0.91. This is the newest version of the model. If you have 0.9.0, which is the original model, go download the new version, which I'll have linked, because that will also be much better. And so you basically bring each of these elements in. Your image, of course, is your element image here. And then you can play with your strength. I keep it at 1 to start, but something you'll want to play with. You may want to not have a full version of it. You may want to have a mix of your face image in there, etc. Now, one thing you'll see is these couple of nodes up here. And what we found was, at least for now, wave speed and Tcache have some issues with PulID. So it won't work correctly unless you have this fix or patch in place. So I have these two nodes here. You'll want to install this patches to node, which again, I'll have linked. You'll want to connect this to where your wave speed is. So over here where I have wave speed, I'm going to connect that there. And then finally, over here, you want to connect to your sampler. And as you can see here, we obviously have two samplers, right? We have our first stage, and then I'm going to shift click and bring it there. So now I have both of my models connecting there as well. And so now we just describe our scene and go. Okay, great. And you can see it's actually pretty close, right? Pretty close in terms of resemblance, but it's not exact. And so what I basically do from here is I will actually do a final little reactor kind of enhancement using the same original model. I'll bring up 1.4 to do this a little bit of the cleanup, and then I'll do my final output, which in this case I'll do my preview bridge. Okay, and there you have it. So now if we just do a quick zoom and compare to the original image, right, you could see this is close. It's not quite right. This is great. This is a really perfect match. And finally, one great thing, just so you realize, right, the output of this is the model. So similar to when we did IP adapter a while back, right, we're using images and the output is a model. So this is going to become very valuable, especially when we start talking about additional types of control nets and other sort of combinations. Having a model, which is going to give you the proper faces, is going to be very valuable. Okay, on to Redux. So Redux is basically, as you saw in the very initial example, a way to combine different ingredients together to create your end result. So in this case, I'm going to use my hand D nodes again, and we're going to talk through it. So for Redux, this is now conditioning, right? So where we're just talking about models coming off of PulID, Redux is conditioning. So similar to what we do with ControlNet with conditioning. So Redux is a similar kind of thing. So you're conditioning your final rendered image to be based on the different sort of inputs, right? In this case, we're going to be using image inputs to help influence it. So as you can see in my little template, I have 4 different items that I could potentially combine together. In this case, I'm only going to use 3. And similar, right, you have different strengths that you have to apply. You have a boat, a college woman, and a bathing suit. So talking through what goes on here, right, you basically have your clip vision encode, right, which basically creates the, call it almost like the framework of the style that you're applying. The style itself, which is loading this special Redux model. You have obviously a special clip vision, and all these will be linked in the description. And you're taking in the image. And this is just a repeat, right? Repeat 1 for image 1, 2, 3, and even 4 if I want to. Additionally, because this is conditioning, we are chaining this together. So you can see we're starting with the boat picture, then we're going to link on the woman picture, and then we're going to link on the clothes, right? And so once you do that, you only have 2 more steps here. One is bringing the initial conditioning, which from our prompt is going to be over here, right? So we're just bringing in just the text that's been encoded by itself. And now we're saying take that initial text and apply the special conditioning around these images, the boat, the woman, and the bathing suit. And so these are already linked up, which is great. And finally, down here at the bottom, we're going to connect to the sampler. And you can see I did it for both samplers, right? The one step and then the remaining. And the question was, well, why did I link the fourth one here even though it's blocked? Because these are all daisy chained, you can see that it will just simply bypass anything that's bypassed, right? So it'll kind of skip over it. But now in the future, if you want to unblock this and use it as well, you can do that. Now, one thing to take into consideration as this is rendering is it's going to take in the full scene of your images into your final output. So little things like, for example, the pictures on the wall or the dresser, those may not want to be in the final scene that you want. If there's a hanger, if there's additional items in that scene, again, you may not want. So as you can see, it did an amazing job of bringing the woman, the bathing suit, and the scene together. But you can see there's a few extra elements here. There's a lamp. There's a lamp. Well, does that make sense in the scene? Of course not. There's a dresser. Does that make sense? And even a bed. Does that make sense? No. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to remove some of these additional elements so that they do not come through. So in this case, for example, you may want to just do a remove background. Now, one caveat as you're doing remove background, and you can see I did not use my InspireNet for this one, is that the dimensions of your image has to match up. Meaning, if you make it a transparent image, it's going to kind of crop it down, and therefore you're not going to have the same dimensions, and it's going to give you an error. So in this case, we do not want to make it transparent, but we are going to just basically turn the background a particular color. In this case, I'm going to use black. And we're just going to do this one as an example and rerun. Okay, great. And you can see it has all the elements there, and it has taken out some of those additional elements from the scene. So you definitely have to play a little bit with the settings to get the right weights, the right sort of levels, but it's very, very cool to be able to quickly integrate your different elements into the scene. Okay, our last example is around blur. Now, there's a couple of examples I wanted to bring up, but the really cool one is around this focal blur. It's a new node that I found recently. It's called Pro Post Depth Map Blur, and essentially uses a depth map to figure out what are the different elements in the scene to keep sharp and which things to blur. And so in this case, you can see I have this node. You have a custom node you'll want to install, and you feed in the original image and the depth map, and then you have some settings here, which we'll talk about, and then it outputs the result. Now, just to show you the original's not bad, right? It has basically a ring box, wine glasses, candles, some rose petals, and some depth of field blur effect, which is decent, but you may want to have it a little more extreme. And so you can see the final result here. You have significant blur, but still keeping the foreground sharp. And so a couple of the elements here to keep in mind, of course, the strength of the blur. The focal depth is kind of where within the sort of spectrum of 1 to 100%, at what point does it really start to blur more, right? So this is at the 85% level into the back of the image. The spread, of course, how much kind of mushiness, if you want to call it that the blur will happen, how many steps, of course, how accurate should that rendering of that blur be. Focal range is kind of like the sort of how much do you want to bring back some of the blur in the foreground, right, to make it a little sharper, as well as the masking to make it either softer on the edges or not. So you have a lot of different things to play with, but the effect is really stunning and can be helpful for your items. Now, that's not, of course, the only way that you can blur. A quick sort of standard way to blur if you want the entire scene blurred except for your kind of main subjects. We basically have done kind of a quick masking effect, right? So we use our InspireNet to remove the background and then use just that item that has been cut out as the overlay on the original image, and using blur to kind of blur the entire scene. So you're basically blurring the entire picture and then overlaying just the subject, which has not been blurred. Not a bad picture at all. It's kind of weird a little bit with the rose petals being blurred right next to the box. That's a little not realistic. So again, this may be a different effect for different scenarios. And then finally, in that same package with the Pro Post Depth Blur is a cool post radial blur. And this one kind of paints a blur circle, radial, around your main subject. So in this case, again, some sort of XY around the circle radius. And how much do you want to spread that out? And again, similarly, you have a very, very stunning picture where you're showing where you want your blur to not happen and then everywhere else where it should. Okay, so hopefully this was a very, very helpful video for everyone. We're almost at that 5,000 subscriber level. Whatever we can do to help get everyone on board, please do. Feel free to share. And thank you so much, as always, for your support. Really, really appreciate it. And looking forward to next time. Take care.